yesterday. I was like, there isn't a way to get all the Soderbergh movies, but that's why I want to buy this box set that he's talking about.
Yeah.
But like his Netflix movies aren't on physical, like
Right.
they didn't release them.
And there's probably a couple, 3, 4, or 5 of them that went straight to Netflix, or
I think there's only 2 that went straight to Netflix, but then there's 3 that went straight to HBO, and those probably didn't get a physical release either. Like Kimmy, although maybe Kimmy is good.
I wanted to see that one. I watched No Sudden Move. I like that.
So that one I didn't like as much. I might need to rewatch. But yeah, he did Kimmy, No Sudden Move, and Let Them All Talk for HBO.
Oh, right.
And he did High Flying Bird and Laundromat for Netflix.
That's right, Laundromat. I couldn't remember if Laundromat was Netflix or Prime, but and
then now he's back in theater. Oh, and he did the 2 miniseries and his series for HBO, the Nick
and
Full Circle and Mosaic.
Yeah,
Mosaic's amazing. And now he's back in theaters. And then he did Command Z for his website, for his own website.
Oh yeah, that thing. Yep.
All right, we're running late. Let's get started.
Yes.
Welcome back to Never Did It. This is Never Did It. It's a show where we look back at the last 100 years of movie history in an effort to fill in some of our own movie blind spots. Today, we're looking at the year 1947, the Best Picture winner for that year, and a movie that was recently remade by Guillermo del Toro. Why don't we start with the Best Picture winner? There's a lot to say about this movie.
I was going to say, I know you have a lot to say about it. I'm very curious to hear all of those things. Well, I'll start just by saying that I picked this movie just because this is the one year, I think the actual only year of the entire list of movies that we did where I hadn't seen a movie from 1947 at all. Like I didn't have any. I think I think The Lady from Shanghai is like a 1947 on Letterboxd, but it didn't come out in the States until 48. So, I stuck to my rules and I was like, hey, I don't have a movie from 1947, which is amazing because I haven't seen the Best Picture winner of that year. And I've seen so many of the Best Picture winners. So I kind of thought it would be a good idea to combine those 2 pursuits. Anytime you can cross a movie off 2 lists at one time, love doing that. Like the Spirit Awards and the Oscars coming out at the same time. Like, oh, good, some of these movies, go for both. I can cross them off, and it's so satisfying.
It's the best. We ran into a neighbor of ours, and I mentioned the Paul Schrader being in my movie theater for The Brutalist, and he goes, "Oh, Paul Schrader's wife, Marianne Hurd, she's the best. You got to check out this movie and this, like The World According to Garp." And she was in a Woody Allen movie, and so my wife she's like, "Yeah, let's do that." And so I was like, "Fine, let's watch Interiors." Oh, it's a Woody Allen movie. Check. It's a 1978 movie. We're doing that next week on the podcast. Check. It's a movie that my wife wants to watch. Check. So it all worked out.
Yeah, isn't that great?
Yeah, sadly the movie's just okay. But okay, we haven't said the name of this movie yet. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify or Apple, it's Gentleman's Agreement. Okay, so tell us what it's about.
This movie stars Gregory Peck as a journalist who gets assigned a story about anti-Semitism in the United States, and in order to write this story, he's going to go undercover and disguise himself as a Jew and be very vocal and open about being a Jew as he goes through his daily life and reacts to every single person in his life who says anti-Semitic things to him, at an alarming rate, actually. That's basically the conceit of the movie, that he's going undercover as a Jew to try to write this story about anti-Semitism, and that's really the best outline of it. There's a little bit more to it than that, but that's the gist.
Yeah, the only other thing going on is because this movie came out in 1947, there's a love story. She's a society gal, this woman that he's in love with, and the story for the magazine was her idea, that someone should expose anti-Semitism, not just broadly, like not with the very loud vocal anti-Semitic politicians and like influencers of the time, so to speak, but what is going on in just general society, mostly high society in Connecticut and New York City when it comes to anti-Semitism, which is an interesting conceit. And you said Gregory Peck goes undercover or disguises himself as a Jew. Thankfully, he doesn't actually change anything about himself. All he does is not mention his mother's maiden name, which is part of his name because it sounds too Goyish. But his last name is Green, so like that's a passing as a Jew name. In fact, at one point he writes Greenberg on his mailbox.
Oh, that's right. He does. Yeah.
Whatever. That's actually not important. What's important is the conceit of the movie. Wow. Where to start? What'd you think of it? You hadn't seen it before.
No, I hadn't seen it before, and overall, I ended up giving it 3 stars because I think for the time that it came out, it was probably kind of like an eye-opening thing for a lot of people. I mean, a lot of it seems fairly tame, by today's standards, but I can understand like why it was a Best Picture winner in its time and why it ended up being a somewhat popular movie. But like I said, I ended up giving it 3 stars. I liked Gregory Peck's performance in a lot. I actually liked all the performances in it a lot. I thought they were mostly pretty good. I know you're not a big Gregory Peck guy, but I like him and I liked his performance. I liked the earnestness of it. Like he was just he was really committed to the story and to the article, and so there was like an honestness or like an honesty and an earnestness to the performance that I certainly appreciated. But man, so much it's so very like just kind of blunt and obvious, and just not there's just no like subtlety to it. I don't think there's like a lot of nuance to it or anything like that. I don't think it's a particularly deep movie, but as far as best picture winners go, it's certainly in like the bottom half, but I don't think it's like a disaster of a winner or anything like that.
I agree that it's not a disaster of a winner because of the context in which it won. I would say, and actually my wife said this and spot on. I mean, I don't know how you could watch this. I think it is the Green Book of its time. Gregory Peck is the Gentile who is crusading for Jews and tells certain Jews in the movie that they're Jewing wrong. That really bothered me. Like I was like screaming at the TV when those scenes happened. Quietly, I'm like, he's not saying what I think he's saying. Oh my God. Oh my God. And then it became like, what is this shit? I started getting really upset. John Garfield, who plays Dave Goldman, the actual Jewish friend,
the soldier.
I thought he was great, and his role is well written. He's the one who actually has to deal with the issues that come up with being Jewish, and a veteran. A decorated, not war hero per se, but he's wearing his uniform throughout the movie.
Very obviously a soldier. Yeah.
So some people are venerating him for that. Most of the protagonists in the movie are huge fans of his. And then you've got the weird scene in the restaurant where he's accosted for being a Yid soldier. I thought that scene was going to go in a very different direction. And then it went there, which was very like School Ties. I've sort of touched on my problem with the movie is Gregory Peck's character telling his Jewish secretary that she's being Jewish the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
Which reminded me a lot of Viggo Mortensen telling Mahershala Ali he's being black wrong.
Right, he's not, because he doesn't eat fried chicken and all these other things. Like, oh my gosh, yeah, you go back and think about that, like, yikes, this was only a couple years ago.
Yeah, that's really reason. I mean, Green Book is an embarrassing movie to have awarded Best Picture to. It's not a terrible movie, but it's just like this. It's so obvious and just overt. There's nothing beneath the surface. And then you have the other major problem of the movie, which is Gregory Peck ends up with the wrong woman.
I couldn't believe it. Why did he go back to her? Like, and I thought, and I didn't know he went back to her at the end. Obviously, because I hadn't seen it, didn't know. But like, I thought it was nice that she sort of redeems herself. In the end, it was like, but he doesn't need to go back to her still. Like, that doesn't need to be part of that. Like, her redemption can come without him going back to her. That bothered me too. I was really upset with that.
Yeah, your point is completely true. Why even have the decoy female lead, the Anne character played by Celeste Holm? And Anne is like, who wouldn't want Anne? She's perfect.
She is literally like the perfect woman. Yeah, like, and she's perfect for him too, more so than just in a general sense.
Yeah. At one point I was like, is Anne going to end up with Garfield's character? But I'm like, oh right, no, he's married and has kids. That doesn't make any sense.
But that would have worked too if he didn't have the wife and kids.
Right. But then he's not as sympathetic throughout the movie if he's not doing it for his family. The whole point of the actual Jewish character is to illustrate what's difficult for him. By and large, his life is fine. He gets a little bit of hate from bigots along the way that he can mostly handle, but it's that he can't get a house in the neighborhood he wants because of the anti-Semitic real estate laws, which are still on the books in some places. They're illegal to enforce. But my mom's was a realtor for decades, and she would always tell me about like, wow, there's a lot of like, you can't be black, you can't be foreign, you can't be Jewish to live in this neighborhood. Obviously, you can't enforce any of those laws.
There's a neighborhood where I live that's like that. You have to like be of a certain religion or something to be able to live in this neighborhood. It's like between Petoskey and Harbor Springs. Like, it's a really weird culty neighborhood.
Yeah, if anyone tried to enforce that law, they wouldn't be able to do it. I'm sure that people who aren't that religion don't want to live there. That's sort of the point, though, is that like now those laws exist so that you don't want to live there, and that's intimidation. I was glad that the movie got into that, and that plot device was really well done. Like you said, it's not a disaster of a movie. I gave it 2.5 stars. Like, I didn't like it, but I didn't hate it. For me, 1.5 stars, those are like the worst movies I've ever seen. Doesn't even really come close. Yeah, so he ends up with Anne. What's the main Kathy, was that her name? Yeah, Kathy.
Yep.
Was the lead. Yeah, you see, and her character is interesting. It's like she is not an anti-Semite. She's not racist. She wants equality for everyone, but she buckles to societal pressures every time. And so she has to apologize to Gregory Peck, who's not really Jewish, which is so funny. But she has to apologize to him every time because he's such a white knight for the Jewish cause.
He is the white savior. Yeah, it's like a total white savior to the Jews sort of thing. And, I can kind of appreciate, again, at the time, you consider it for the time, I feel like it was like coming from a good place, but also like, it's just a little cringy, to use a 2020 phrase.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the development of the movie because it's interesting. The Jewish studio heads did not want this movie to be made. They didn't want to rock the boat. And that is expressed through the character of the Jewish secretary who likes that she got a job by changing her last name. By the way, this is still an issue in America today. Indeed.com, I think it was, or maybe it was resume.com, one of these job sites did a study asking people to self-identify if they wouldn't hire a Jewish employee, and a quarter of respondents said they would not or would prefer not to. That's people who admit it, right? That's one quarter admitting it. So it's obviously way higher. And everyone has inherent biases. We know this. But wow, there's a lot of overt anti-Semites not hiring. And, I don't even have like a very Jewish last name, but I have a very Jewish resume. And I've had difficulty getting people to call me back. Now, granted, I also, to be fair, I live in a market where it's like impossible to get a job. There's so many people looking for work all the time in New York. But yeah, I'm kind of pigeonholed now. So that's a real thing. But then he rags on her because she doesn't want any of those other Jews coming into the office.
Key kind of Jews, like I think is the actual phrase she uses.
Yeah, they use the word cucky quite a bit in this movie, which is not a phrase I've ever heard. And I hang out with a ton of Jewish people, and we don't like say that about each other. But I can say that that wasn't the case in the Jewish community in the 40s. Like, I don't know that there wasn't like, hoity-toity Jews who were trying to keep the regular rabble Jewish community out of their workspaces because they were too loud or too yiddy. I don't know. Maybe that's the case. I've never seen that.
That was shocking. Like, yeah, I mean, I should say most of the movie was fairly tame, but like that was still just because, you just don't hear that anymore. Like anywhere, you just don't hear that word.
Right. In fact, if it was coming from a racist character, it wouldn't be shocking at all. To just hear Gregory Peck and his secretary saying that stuff back and forth to each other, I was like, what is happening? What is the point this movie's trying to make? And then here's my other issue, is that they don't talk about anything that's specifically Jewish as the reason that Jews are persecuted. They talk about prejudice in general, and you could have really swapped this out for any other race or religion that can pass for white. And in some cases, you can swap it out for those that can't, like especially when he shows up to this restricted hotel to try to find out if it's restricted. I was like, oh, this just is Green Book. That is like what Green Book is about. That's why it was a Green Book. I found that frustrating. But yeah, let's just real quick talk about the Kathy Ann thing. Kathy is a good person. She has a good soul, but she wants to marry Gregory Peck, and she knows that he won't always be pretending to be Jewish. So she doesn't want him to tell her friends that he's Jewish. She doesn't want to stir things up, has to come back and apologize for that. And that happens like 2 or 3 times. That's why at the end, the fact that he ends up with her instead of Anne is really annoying. And Anne actually, like, I thought, oh, well, maybe Anne is just here to be a daffy dame, but she professes her love for him.
She really does, yeah. And I wouldn't have even minded as much if not that he necessarily had to get with Anne, but it's just the fact that he went back to Kathy at all is the bummer part. Like, I mean, in the 40s, yeah, he's going to probably end up with someone, but I think if it was a bolder, like some more nuanced type of movie, he could end up with neither of the characters. And I think that would have been satisfying or I think more satisfying in a narrative way to show like more growth. And then like, oh, he just went back to the woman you've been with the entire time. Super lazy.
Gregory Peck was not the original choice for this movie. Cary Grant was offered this role, and despite his perhaps Jewish heritage, turned it down because he didn't want it to affect his career because, like I said, this movie was like going to have a hard time getting made. Now, what bothers me about that is that later on, Grant kind of like leaned on this potential Jewish ancestry that he had after Israel became a state and being Jewish was a more like hip thing, like in the Walter Matthau era. I'm always going back to Matthau, but like, or even like Kirk Douglas was like a major leading Jewish star. And I don't like that Peck did that later when it was safer. Now, I don't know when in his career he's supposedly found.
You mean that Grant did that later?
Sorry, Gregory Peck, very much not Jewish at all.
No.
Yeah, that Cary Grant did that later. I don't know when Grant found that out. I forgot to look that up again. And also, it might not even be true. It might just be something that he said because he thought would be good for his career.
Yeah.
But it makes me think a lot less of Cary Grant either way.
Right. Yeah. Either way is not great.
Yeah. Let's just real quick. The guy who plays Gregory Peck's son in this movie, who also has an interesting storyline where he's being bullied because people have heard that his dad is Jewish. And I thought that was handled really well. And it was one of the reasons that Gregory Peck and Kathy broke up like the third time is because she tells the boy to react to bullying by being like, but you're not Jewish. Don't worry about it.
Right. Yeah. They're making fun for being Jewish. And she's like, but that shouldn't be the problem with it.
Right.
And yeah. I thought that was a good scene.
I agree. I thought that was handled really well. I liked it a lot. That kid is played by Dean Stockwell. Blew my mind.
would have never, even in a million years, have guessed it. I mean, obviously, it's, adult versus whatever, it's like 8 or whatever in this movie. But yeah, that's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, you've never seen Battlestar Galactica, right?
I have not seen Battlestar Galactica, but I've seen Dean Stockwell is in one of my favorite culty movies, that one of the Neil Young movies. I've seen the Human Highway. He was like the co-director and star of that. So that's my big thing with him.
Yeah, you should. First off, you should watch Battlestar Galactica because it's incredible. I don't want to spoil it because it's very easy to spoil his role in that show. So I'm not going to say anymore. He's amazing. But yeah, I just saw someone else's Letterboxd review say Dean Stockwell is in this, and I was like, what? First off, impossible. It's too old.
Yeah.
And then nope, he's a child, and he's good.
Yeah, he does a good job.
So what awards other than Best Picture did this thing win?
Well, it was up for a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was up for 8, actually, and it won for the Best Picture. The director, who actually, we haven't mentioned the director at all, but he did win Best Director as well, Elia Kazan, very controversial figure in Hollywood because he went and named names, and a lot of people don't appreciate that. But
you got to watch any video footage of Orson Welles talking about Elia Kazan. It's all amazing.
Oh, yeah, I've seen some of that. Or there was, they gave him the honorary Oscar one year, and when they pan to the crowd, like, some people are clapping, a couple people are standing up, and some people, like, I specifically remember Ed Harris just, like, like, some people were just still not happy about it. So he's a very controversial figure, but of course he's directed some great films over the years, and it's, he's certainly, just as a director alone, has, earned his place in the history books. But he won the Best Director for this, and then the other winner, Celeste Holm, won Best Supporting Actress for this as well. So those were the 3 that it won. And then it was also nominated for Gregory Peck was nominated for Best Actor. Dorothy McGuire, who played Kathy, was nominated for Best Actress. There was another supporting actress nominee from this movie, and that's Anne Revere, who played Gregory Peck's mother.
Oh.
Who did almost nothing until like that last scene in the movie, like almost like towards the end. Like, she did very little until the end.
Every time she talked, I was like, this movie sucks.
Yeah.
She's so bad.
And she wasn't even that big a part of the movie either, I didn't think. So I was kind of surprised to see that. And then the other 2 nominations it got was for Best Screenplay and then Best Film Editing. So, I mean, it went 3 for 8, won Picture, Director, and Supporting Actress. So that's a pretty good night.
I have to just go back to the Kazan thing for 1 second because of the Welles. Everything you said is obviously totally true and fully encapsulated in Orson Welles saying things like, I'll never watch a picture by Elia Kazan, which is a real shame because he's a great filmmaker. Okay, speaking of modern movie fans, one of them was Guillermo del Toro, and he made a movie called Nightmare Alley a few years ago, and that was an adaptation of a book, and the first adaptation of that book came out in 1947, and I was surprised you hadn't seen it, because I know you really like the Guillermo del Toro Nightmare Alley.
Yeah, I had definitely intended to, like when the remake had come out, and I wanted to wait until after I'd seen the first one, because I was like, well, I don't want to spoil like the Del Toro movie, because I know I'm going to be seeing that soon, so I'll watch the first one afterwards, and then whatever, just never did it.
Well, now you have. It was directed by Edmund Goulding, who I don't know, and I don't know any of his other movies. He's very prolific, as was everyone who directed a movie back then. But these were, this is a noir film, and it's very genre forward. It wasn't like in the conversation for classic until I think until Del Toro was like, I like this, I'm going to bring it back. Del Toro's version is the story is the same, almost beat for beat.
Yeah.
Ending's a little different. The Del Toro version, I think, ends earlier and in a better spot. It's the spot kind of where I wish this version had ended, but not like the one scene after that is terrible.
Right.
It's just very much of its time because, as we said, the guy and his dame have to reunite.
Of course. It's the 40s.
But yeah, it's about a con man. Oh, also, we get a little bit more backstory about the main character in the Del Toro version. But okay, but we're talking about the Goulding version. So Tyrone Power is our main character, and he is a carny, and he's learning how to carn. He gets in good with this woman who's a mentalist, and her mentalist husband, who's pretty much on his way out. He's a severe alcoholic. It doesn't seem they're talking about like they have to put him in a home, a rehab facility. But before he can do that, stuff gets in the way, and Tyrone Power ends up learning, taking his place in this duo and learning all their like big tricks. And Tyrone Power is so charismatic that he takes it this whole shtick of theirs to another level outside of the carnival. And in the meantime, he gets caught up with the very sexy young, like a Vanna White type. Yeah. I don't know, a special assistant, fabulous, beautiful assistant. Her job is usually sitting in an electric chair and showing off static electricity from her fingers while wearing an illegal bikini.
That's right.
he, because she's so hot, they end up, fooling around and then are forced to have a shotgun wedding. and then she becomes his lovely assistant for the rest of the movie. And then it's just like about how he keeps getting in. He wants more and more and more, and meets up with a psychiatrist who wants to help him bilk basically heavier hitters, bigger dollar people, because, and this is real, in the 30s and 40s, seances and stuff like that were really popular. So this plays on that, and then he gets in way over his head, and the story is like bookended really in a really satisfying way. You said this in your Letterboxd review, and I totally agree that Del Toro took a lot of these themes and improved upon them. I do think that the New Nightmare Alley, it's missing like a little bit of the charm. It's a little bit more downbeat than this one, but it does narratively really satisfy, because they hit home a lot on like the geek theme, like that you could be at your lowest at any time. Like the Willem Dafoe character doesn't really exist in this version. Right. Anyway, I'm rambling. What did you think of this movie that I love so much that I could talk about it forever?
Yeah, and I really liked it a lot too. In fact, I gave it 4 stars. I feel like maybe I underrated it just because I was comparing it too much to the new one, because I thought the remake was superior in a lot of ways, and there's more you can do in 2021 than you could do in 1947, just in every facet in film, and Del Toro is one of our best, so it's no surprise that he made a superior version. So I think maybe I compared it too much. It's at least a 4-star movie, 4.5-star movie. Yeah, I mean, I love that noir stuff. Tyrone Power is, like I said, so charismatic and just so good in this role, and just really kind of carrying the movie, commanding kind of everything. Everything kind of centers around him. The whole kind of circus basically starts to revolve around him very quickly. He's just fantastic in the movie. All the performances were good. The black and white, I'd really love to see like Del Toro's version in black and white, like we talked about. But I think the black and white obviously really suits this material. It's it's a really good noir movie. I mean, if you like any of these noir movies from like the 40s or whatever, I mean, it fits right in there with some of the best ones.
Totally. Can we talk about Tyrone Power a little bit?
Yeah, let's talk about Tyrone Power all day.
Okay. I'm so sad he died young, because he's incredible. Billy Wilder made a movie with him called Witness for the Prosecution. Incredible. And he plays like kind of the same character, like a guy you want to root for, but you kind of can't. And he was incredible. And, people, going back to Cary Grant, people are always comparing George Clooney to Cary Grant, but Tyrone Power looks exactly like George Clooney.
He really does.
I'm shocked they're not related. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine about, why don't we talk about Tyrone Power the way we talk about Cary Grant? He made almost as many movies as Cary Grant, even though he died really young, but they weren't, with the exception of like Witness for the Prosecution, they weren't for the most part, the most acclaimed or widely seen movies. And most of them haven't stood the test of time. Although there's a few I want to check out that I saw that I think are probably pretty underrated. And then Grant was hooked up with like Hitchcock and Capra, which is big. And while making one Billy Wilder film is great, who's Goulding?
Yeah.
Who is this guy?
Well, you know what? I looked him up too. I was like, because I didn't recognize the name either, but I have actually seen one other Goulding movie. He directed the Best Picture winner of 1932, Grand Hotel. So I gave Grand Hotel 4 stars. It's pretty good, but it's famous for being the only Best Picture winner to have been nominated for nothing else, for one award, and that was it. Best Picture, and it won.
It still has that record?
I believe so, yeah. I'd have to double, but yeah, I can't think of any other movie that's only was up for one thing. Even like Wings, the first Oscar was up for like 2 or 3 things, and they only had like 10 awards total.
I feel like in this era where there's 10 nominees now, I feel like that might happen again.
It's possible. Like, we've seen a couple movies come out that only get like 2 nominations, but we haven't had one that just got 1 in a long time. Like Nickel Boys this year only has 2. There was one last year. Past Lives was another one that only had the 2 nominations. But it's been a while since we've had a movie that only was nominated for 1 Oscar, and it was Best Picture.
Right. It's these little ones, these little movies now that get close.
Yeah.
Not like a blockbuster, because a blockbuster is going to get a bunch of below the line stuff.
Right, yeah. Like, you got your Wicked and Brutalist and Amelia Perez in the double digits this year. I mean, but yeah, those are just bigger movies that have a lot of gaga.
Right, or even Dune, which is like getting snubbed everywhere, is still getting like effects and stuff like that. Or actually not, is it getting visual effects?
It's up for visual effects, yep. It's in that one. And sound.
The Angelica Theater out here is doing an Oscar pool. You can win a $500 gift card. So I entered, and the only category I have Dune winning is Best Sound, because holy crap, that movie sounds good. Yeah,
sounds amazing. And visual effects this year will probably be, well, I can see winning visual effects too.
I wound up giving Wicked a lot of below the line stuff because I feel like it's more fresh in people's minds, and people really like it.
Yeah, I can see it. I think it's going to be one of those two.
Okay, so the only other thing that I really want to talk about, except please watch this movie. It's so much fun.
Yeah.
For a movie about a guy destroying himself, it is so much fun. Oh, well, the Tyrone Power thing. Hold on, I didn't finish. Then I was like, all right, well, what about he died young? So maybe that's why he's not so popular. But he made 70 movies, so that doesn't really make sense, or at least 50. Maybe it was more like 50.
Letterboxd has 73 things with him in it, but that includes stuff he was in, like he was in a documentary, The Kid Stays in the Picture, about Robert Evans, but like that's archive footage. So as far as
that came out long after he was dead.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
and then I was like, well, James Dean only made like 5 movies, and people love it. Or John Cazale made 5 movies, and people are obsessed with him. So, but maybe Tyrone Power is kind of a John Cazale type, where it's like you respect him if you're a movie fan, but if you're not, you don't necessarily know who he is.
Right. Like, yeah, I mean, John Cazale is certainly not in that level of celebrity like James Dean. You say James Dean, people will, even if they don't know like the name of the movies he was in, like they'll recognize like, oh yeah, James Dean, the movie star who died young.
Right. But James Dean was also beautiful. But so was Tyrone Power. Died of a heart attack at 44 and smoked 3 packs a day. So what are you going to do?
Well, that'll do it.
The other thing I wanted to talk about was Colleen Gray, who is so pretty. Wow. This was, I'm pretty sure, like far and away the biggest movie she was ever a part of.
Well, and she was in, Colin Gray was in The Killing, the Kubrick movie.
Did we cover that? No. We covered, I sometimes confuse The Killing, even though that's a heist movie. I sometimes confuse that with the Sudden Fear, which those movies aren't similar. In fact, Sudden Fear is a lot more like Sunset Boulevard than it is like The Killing. But I don't know, for some reason I get those confused. So this movie got no Oscar love, of course, because it was schlock.
Yep. Yeah, a lot of noir stuff got overlooked, and unless it had to be like really faint, like Billy Wilder did one, like Double Indemnity or whatever, like those. But yeah, like a lot of the noir movies just would get passed over.
Right. Oh, we should talk about, because we're wrestling fans, Mike Mazurski, who played the strongman, the role played by Ron Livingston in the newer version, was a professional wrestler. Important to note, he was the Dave Bautista of his time.
Not quite as good, of course, because no one's better than Dave Bautista, but
for sure, no, he's not, and also not as good as Ron Livingston. But I keep saying Ron Livingston, not
that's
Ron
not
Livingston.
Right. Yeah,
Ron
Perlman.
Yeah. Ron Livingston could never.
From Office Space. It's like, wait, is he a strongman? It's like, wait, did Brad say that?
My mistake. Where do these two movies place on your top of the 1940s list?
I've only my top of the 40s list. So I have them down to I have a 24 film list, because I only go down to my 4 movies I've given 4 stars to or more. And so Gentleman's Agreement doesn't actually appear on the list. It's somewhere off the list, because like I said, I gave it 3 stars. I thought it was like an interesting enough movie to have seen, but yeah, nothing crazy. Nightmare Alley ranks at 21 on my list, but again, which feels really low for a movie I liked so much. But I've said this every time we do movies from the 40s. I mean, if you look at the rest of the list, Citizen Kane, Maltese Falcon, Double Indemnity, Notorious, Pinocchio, Colonel Blimp, Brief Encounter, Lifeboat, To Be or Not to Be, like those are some of the movies that are ranked above it. So I mean, 40s was there's a lot of great movies in that decade.
Yeah. I also don't have Gentleman's Agreement on my list. My list goes down to 3 stars, and I still don't have Gentleman's Agreement on my list. What I do have is Nightmare Alley, which is at number 9 between The Great Dictator and White Heat, which is this great James Cagney movie.
I've never seen that one, but I've always wanted to.
It's incredible. I just saw it for the first time recently, over Thanksgiving.
Cool.
Really good. And then there's a few other movies that came out in 1947 that I'll just shout out for where they are on the list. They're all pretty low down. Like I said, Gentleman's Agreement didn't make it. Fun and Fancy Free was the Disney movie. I think it was the final post-war Disney movie that was a compilation movie, and it was Mickey and the Beanstalk, which is pretty good.
I love that one.
But then it's also Bongo, which is the sequel, the spiritual sequel to Dumbo, which has a very catchy song in it. A bear says I love you with a slap, but otherwise stinks. That's my number 30, which is I only have 31 on this list, and the only one below it is The Magnificent Ambersons. The other movie I watched recently to just try to beef up on 1947 was Powell and Pressburger's Black Narcissus, which is not nearly as good as The Red Shoes, which we've covered on this podcast, and Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, which we've covered on this podcast, but does some interesting things that we'll talk about next week, because it reminded me a lot of one of the movies we're covering for 1978. Okay, cool. So yeah, we'll be back next week with 1978. See ya!